which I already have opened is United Nations Charter. There are some provisions of United Nations Charter which I would be dealing with. Meanwhile, I'll first start. For today's webinar, I would like to give you a brief synopsis of my presentation. It would run around 50 minutes to 1 hour, and in this particular session, I would be dealing with the facts of the case regarding Enrica Lexi arbitration, the incident, and the tussle between India and Italy, which has been running for more than 8 years, and now partially settled, not completely settled, but I would say it is partially settled, with the concerns of Italy getting more satisfied than that of India. Um, Also, I would be pitching up, would not answer maybe today, but I would definitely answer tomorrow. I would be pitching up some legal questions involved in Enrica Lexi arbitration today. Would try to answer them a bit while going through these general provisions of peaceful settlement of disputes under Part 15 of UNCLOS, from Article 279 onwards. For our reference, initially, if you are noting it down somewhere, Article 279 is very important for us. Article 292 is very important for us. These are those primary articles which we would be discussing more about. Uh, so first part is that I'll be dealing with those facts and legal questions involved, and the second part of the webinar, which I would reach, I think, shortly, I would be discussing about both voluntary and compulsory procedures of dispute settlement laid down under United Nations Convention for the Law of Sea 1982. So I would start with the facts of the case. It was that unauspicious day of 12th February in 2012, when this private oil tanker was traveling all the way from Singapore, at the port of Singapore, and it was en route towards Egypt. And while it was sailing through the coast of off the coast of Ambalpuza, near Cochin, in Indian contiguous waters, uh, it it incidentally met with one fishing boat named Saint Anthony's, which was Indian boat. It was Indian fishermen boat, and there were fishermen on board. Uh, Italian Marines were there on board. It was a private tanker, and Italian Marines were on board, not on a warship, not on a naval ship, but on a private oil tanker. So that is another legality involved. So they were on board on a private oil tanker named Enrica Lexi. They were on duty, which is technically called Vessel Protection Detachment. Generally, naval officers are posted on such oil tankers or such commercial vehicles uh, to secure these vehicles from pirate attacks, etc., or any kind of crime on high seas. High seas, I'm sure you are well versed with. So there are 3 4 zones in the waters. So first zone, which is very close to the mainland, is territorial water, which extends up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline. So 12 nautical miles does not mean 12 kilometers. It means approximately 22 kilometers. And from the end of territorial waters, further 12 nautical miles, the zone is called contiguous zone. And after 24 nautical miles from the baseline, what we call is exclusive economic zone, which extend up to 200 nautical miles. After 200 nautical miles, it is high seas. They are called high seas. Okay. So whenever you will read unclause by yourself, there are certain aspects which you should look at. It is beyond the scope of this particular webinar, but I would still want you to learn more about that. So those are, not every land mass has contiguous zone, territorial water, or exclusive economic zone. Which are they? Question mark. Google them, find them in unclause. Okay. But then countries like India, these mainland countries like India, they have all the 3 zones in the waters. So this particular incident, while this Enrica Lexi was traversing from Singapore towards Egypt, uh, near Ambalpuza, Kochi, uh, approximately 20.5 nautical miles from Indian baseline. They encounter something called Saint Anthony, which was a small fisherman boat. Uh, they shoot these Italian Marines on board Enrica Alexi. They shoot on these fishermen, and in this particular tussle, two Indian fishermen, they die. So immediately this particular thing was taken note by Indian authorities, and Enrica Alexi oil tanker was intercepted, and it was asked to get to come to the port for to the Kochi port for further investigations and further legal proceedings. These two Italian Marines were detained, and so 20.5 nautical miles. So it was contiguous zone, not territorial waters. So territorial waters, if this incident would have occurred in territorial waters, there would have been no legal question involved primarily, because in territorial waters, the country whose territorial water it is has exclusive jurisdiction of applying its domestic laws in the territorial water. So there's a in international law there's a difference between the aspect of sovereignty, exercise of sovereignty, and exercise of sovereign rights. Exercise of sovereign rights are there up to a greater extent in contiguous zone, and up to some not much kind of rights, sovereign rights we have in exclusive economic zone. Of course, we have marine scientific research rights, etc. Using exclusive economic zone for peaceful purposes, for economic prosperity, economic resources, fishing, etc. But then there are certain permission related aspects which is again beyond the scope of this particular webinar. We can be discussing it somewhere later if we encounter each other in future, maybe. Anyway, so making myself clear that Indian laws are applicable in territorial waters, and the incident happening at 20.5 nautical miles, that is contiguous zone. Now the question is that once India has detained them, India has detained those two Italian Marines. India wants to try that case, stating that you have killed two Indian nationals, two Indian fishermen who were just there for their fishing activity, which is part of a very important customary international law, that you have freedom of navigation as well. So you have freedom of navigation in contiguous zone, and they were just exercising that, and they were just there for fishing activities, etc., etc. And you have killed them, and this is a crime under Indian laws, and you may be punishable for the offense under IPC under section 302. Mind it, Italy and Europe have problem with India's application of section 302. Why? Because in Europe, capital punishment is not inflicted even in the crime, even with respect to crimes involving murder. So capital punishment is beyond the application of European domestic laws, and they consider it uh, a threat to life. They consider it as the capital punishment is considered as violation of customary norm of international law or just cogence. Right to life is now being branded as customary international law and just cogence. It is also given the status of just cogence, meaning that even in the case of emergencies, you cannot violate certain norms of international law, even in case of emergency. Routine mein to you cannot do it, but even in the case of emergencies, you can just not violate certain norms, and they are and India has a penalty of capital punishment for murder. So that was the problem with Europe. You try for anything, but not 302, because the maximum punishment which you can give to our Italian citizens is that of capital punishment, and we are offended about it. That was Italy's contention. Uh, Immediate contention given by Italian Marines in this particular case was they said, number one, they mistook the fishermen as pirates. They thought that they are pirates. Okay, I will come back to this piracy aspect a bit just in few minutes. And another contention which they gave was that they mistook themselves being in India's contiguous waters. They thought that they are in high seas. They thought that they are, no, sorry, not sorry, they are not in high seas. They thought that they are in international waters, and uh, possibly these marines are posted on the oil tanker only and only to protect the oil tanker from pirate attacks. And what they thought is, what we have done is the normal functional duty which we are supposed to do, and please kindly excuse us, it's a mistake. And there's no mental intent involved in this particular crime, and thus we are not liable. That was their basic this thing. So India said, man, you were in contiguous waters and you have committed a crime. And according to, there are certain Indian laws, and there is a notification of Home Ministry dated 26th of April 1981, according to which we have extended our certain criminal laws beyond territorial waters. And we quoted that particular notification of Home Ministry stating that now we have this, our domestic, in our domestic law, uh, if you commit such kind of offense in contiguous waters, you will be liable. And India exercises sovereignty, not sovereign rights, sovereignty in such areas. And sovereignty में क्या होता है कि you are actually uh, you are actually allowed to implement your criminal laws as well in that particular area. So these are the basic. So let me deal contiguous zone a bit more. What are the rights of the nation, of the adjoining nation in its contiguous zone? It is fourfold. Number one, it has custom related rights, it has taxation related rights, immigration related rights, and controlling marine pollution related rights. And also one more internationally recognized right which we have in contiguous zone is the right to hot pursuit. Hot pursuit is, say for example, a pirate kills someone in territorial waters and tries and tries to elope. So India's naval authorities or coast guards or whatever, they can chase that particular vessel up till contiguous zone. And then in fact, we have right to self defense also in contiguous zone in during hot pursuit. You have killed someone and we can kill you if you don't follow our instruction, if you don't stop when we intercept you, etc., or you counter attack, we can kill you. So that kind of rights we have in contiguous zones. So one important aspect, I told you that I will come back to piracy in a couple of minutes. And what I wanted to tell you is ki when this particular incident happened in 2012, that time piracy was very much dominant in Arabian Sea. We all know that pirates from Somalia is creating havoc to the maritime security of all littoral states in this particular zone. Okay, so there is one organization named International Maritime Organization, and at this particular time, uh, International Maritime Organization designated this particular area as high risk area from piracy, of course. Initially, it was the high risk area was demarcated up till 65-degree east, 65-degree east longitude. We all know that Indian standard time is 82.5 degree east. Okay, 82.5 degree east, which travels all the way from north and partly bisects Sri Lanka as well. Okay, so 82 and 65. 65 comes somewhere in the middle of Arabian Sea. But this 65-degree east was extended by International Maritime Organization up till 78 degrees east. That is exactly cutting half our Indian peninsula. Okay, Indian subcontinent peninsula. So all this area, which was earlier only half of Arabian Sea, has been now extended to whole of Arabian Sea as high risk area in 2012. This was their basic argument, stating that we are well aware of piracy in Arabian Sea, and we are well aware of the notification of International Maritime Organization, and genuinely we mistook these fishermen as pirates. So kindly excuse us. That was their basic contention regarding their act of killing the fishermen. Anyway, One important principle of UNCLOS I would like to tell you is when during high seas, if a crime is committed in high seas, like for example, say for example, a vessel is a commercial vessel is floating in high sea, and some other nation, some what we call some criminals from other nation, they attack that particular commercial tanker or commercial vessel in high seas, then according to UNCLOS, such incidents would be covered by the flag state. I mean the commercial tankers ka flag state. So in case if this particular incident would have occurred in high seas really, then Italy would have had outright jurisdictions and the jurisdiction which India could not have challenged anyway. Okay, but this did not happen in high sea. This happened in contiguous water. Therefore, India contended and went ahead of try these Italian marines for killing these fishermen. And initially, this particular case was taken up by Kerala High Court because of the territorial jurisdiction argument, etc. But then Italy condemned India's attempt to try them in High Court at least, because they considered that Italian Marines were under official duty of Italy, and so therefore it is an outright tussle between Italy and India. So apex court should try this particular case rather than Kerala High Court, and then we accepted that argument of Italy and the condemnation of Italy, what we call, and we shifted this particular case from Kerala High Court to Indian Supreme Court. And then the long saga of legal battle occurred, and I am sure many of you would have been following it. And it took 8.5 long years for an international body to finally give preliminary judgment on this particular case. Okay, so what is the judgment? What actually happened in the middle? We would deal with that shortly. Okay, so India's argument, which India's argument for trying Italian Marines were twofold. Number one, India said that India had jurisdiction to try this case. India wanted jurisdiction basically. If we would be able to try them, and we would be able to show our supremacy in international, in contiguous zone or Indian waters, etc. Actually, why India was adamant in trying these Italian Marines is because it sets a future precedent. Nobody would be coming to our waters or near our waters and kill our citizens and go away scot free. Therefore it was legible for India to contend this particular case. Okay, so that was the maritime security aspect of it. That was the politics of it. But then things didn't go in our favor. We know it. The judgment of Permanent Court of Arbitration came in July and all. It came in May, which Indian government didn't disclose in the start, but it got displayed on Permanent Court of Arbitration website on 26th of July 2020, and then whole of the world got to know that we have actually lost the jurisdiction aspect of this particular case in international fora. Okay, actually, uh, they were once they were arrested and detained in 2012. We were condemned by European Parliament in 2015, and the condemnation was that official resolution was passed by EU Parliament stating that the human rights of Italian Marines are getting threatened in India because they are detained without charges. We didn't till 2014. We did not invoke any criminal charges, and we just detained them in our prisons, etc. As we know, our procedures are a bit delayed. uh, Part of the reason is common law legal system. Part of the problem is the lethargy of Indian courts and Indian establishment, etc., and the bureaucratic red tapeism which we have. Anyway, but then it was a bit of shame when I was reading this news in 2015. I was like, what are we doing? I mean, why are we not serious about at least we should frame charges. We should have a legible right to detain them in our prison. At least do your own homework. And then after this particular resolution, we hurriedly gave this case to NIA, National Investigating Agency, and they immediately slapped charges on them in the end of 2014. I think we slapped some charges, and murder was dropped to a less rigorous violent act. Okay, so the charge of murder was replaced with, they were charged with violent act against Indian national. A second aspect which we wanted, we contended, was that Italian Marines do not have sovereign immunity in this particular case, because they are not in on their own warship, or Italian naval vessel. They are on commercial tankers. So India actually didn't want to accept the vessel protection detachment aspect of Italian Marines, VPD we call it, the deployment of naval officers on oil tankers or commercial vehicles to to secure them from pirate attacks or other criminal activities in the international waters. Anyway, so after 2015 EU Parliament resolution, which was forced by Italy, uh, in 2015, Italy went to ITLOS, International Tribunal for the Law of Sea, which was established under a United Nations Convention for the Law of Sea. It is a permanent body situated in Hamburg, Germany. Okay, this is a permanent body with respect to. Wait, let me. I think I should read the article straight. Article 279. You can see it on the screen. That what is the purpose of peaceful settlement of disputes is laid down in Article 279. State parties shall settle any dispute between them concerning the interpretation and application of this convention, that is UNCLOS, by peaceful means in accordance with Article 2, paragraph 3 of UN Charter, and to this end shall seek to a solution by the means indicated in Article 33, paragraph 1 of the UN Charter. So, two important aspects out here to note in the very start is that uh, UNCLOS itself lays down the process of peaceful settlement of disputes, and state parties whoever are the parties of UNCLOS, they should so UNCLOS mandates that you must settle your dispute peacefully, and those peaceful disputes are later bifurcated into voluntary methods of peaceful settlement of disputes and compulsory methods of peaceful settlement of disputes, which I will deal with. But these dispute settlement mechanism under Article 279 are subject to Article 2 of UN Charter, Article 2, paragraph 3 of UN Charter, and Article 33, paragraph 1 of UN Charter. Article 2, Article 2, paragraph 3 of UN Charter, it says that all members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security is not endangered. So indirectly, UNCLOS is preserving international peace and security via Article 279. That's what this means. Okay, and Article 33, I would not waste your time reading those provision. Article 33 is all about good faith. That such dispute settlement mechanism would give primacy. The state parties would give primacy to good faith while settling their dispute. So good faith, there are various aspects of good faith that you're not supposed to hide the facts and evidences, etc. Your intent would be to settle the dispute amicably. So those are those aspects, Article 33. Uh, so in other words, uh, Article 279 has to be read with Article 2 of UN Charter and Article 33 of UN Charter. Eh, when Italy went to ITLOS, ITLOS gave a kind of a diplomatic ruling in 2015 stating that India and Italy should suspend all criminal proceedings against Marines, and they should not do anything which would prejudice the future of this particular case. That was a kind of a ruling with no actual settlement. So it did not convey much, this particular ruling. So this kind of ruling are called provisional measures. Okay, so provisional measures are usually given so that the subject matter of the disputes does not get diluted and evidences are preserved, etc. So it restricted India and Italy both to undertake any further criminal proceedings, and which didn't satisfy Italy at all. So Italy approached Permanent Court of Arbitration. How Italy approached Permanent Court of Arbitration? Why did it go to ITLOS, and why didn't it go to ICJ? Why didn't it go for a special chamber, etc., etc.? I would deal with once I would be explaining the dispute settlement mechanism under UNCLOS. So you'll have to wait for that in the second part of this particular presentation. On 26th June 2015, Italy approached Permanent Court of Arbitration situated in Hague. It was established in 1899 under Hague Conference. Both ICJ and PCA operate in same building, but that doesn't mean they are the same. It is to be noted that PCA actually facilitates, it administratively facilitates international arbitration. It does not only deal with arbitration under UNCLOS, it also deals with other arbitrations as well. So when you will go to PCA website, you will see, you will yourself see that there are range of cases, there are variety of cases which PCA have settled in past. Okay, so arbitration under PCA within the framework of UNCLOS is governed by Annexure 7 of UNCLOS. Annexure 7 mandates that you can go, that is a compulsory procedure. When voluntary methods fail, then you will have to take up compulsory procedure. I will be detailing more on this. So those compulsory procedure, one of the part is Annexure 7, and according to Annexure 7, if dispute is not settled via voluntary means, then that dispute would be dealt with by an arbitral body, an international arbitral body. And in this particular case, that international arbitral body is Permanent Court of Arbitration. Before moving further, it is important for you to understand the notion of international disputes, especially with respect to law of the sea. What is a dispute under law of sea? That should be the primary this thing. I mean, that should be our primary discussion before moving forward. So disputes, actually, the thing is, there are various rules which are codified in UNCLOS. So a same rule can be interpreted differently by a different nation. Okay, and in such case, say for example, there's a dispute A which has two which there's a rule A which has two interpretations, A and B. Italy interprets that particular provision as A, and India interprets that particular provision as B. And thus, when there's a difference between interpretations between two particular countries, stop visiting around with the slide. Uh, I mean this thing. Okay. Anyway, so when there is what I was saying, it distracted me actually. Thank you. You were successful, whoever it is. Anyway, yes. So when one particular rule is interpreted differently by two nations, it amounts to dispute. And dispute of interpretations are settled according to part 15 of UNCLOS 1982. ठीक है, इसको हम और पढ़ेंगे but very short. Anyway, there is a actually, when I'm saying, when I'm saying that dispute settlement mechanism is integral part of law of this UNCLOS, United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, it looks very normal for you. But when you would get detailed understanding of international law में सबसे बड़ा problem is dispute settlement only. So this particular convention has done well in the progressive development of international law, while inculcating the dispute settlement mechanism within the convention itself and mandating state parties to either go for voluntary methods, and if voluntary methods are not successful, you have to compulsorily go for dispute settlement mechanism, and you would be bound by it. That is a different aspect when South China Sea ruling comes up and China does not follow that particular ruling, and then whole idea of compulsory arbitration seems to fail. But then aberrations cannot be general rules. That also you should understand. You must also not take your eye off the kind of condemnation which China has faced regarding its conduct with respect to South China Sea, which we can deal a bit later. Excuse me. All right. So regarding the facts of the case, थोड़ा बहुत आगे बढ़ते हैं. So Permanent Court of Arbitration was established in 1899. provides administrative services to international arbitration. It is a 5-member tribunal, and the ruling which Permanent Court of Arbitration gave and which was detrimental to India's interest are: number one, that India does not have jurisdiction to try these Marines. Number one, India failed on that part to argue in Permanent Court of Arbitration. Number two, Marines should get functional immunity because they were performing official duty on behalf of Italy. That was the second important ruling of Permanent Court of Arbitration. And third is, Italy must try this particular case. The rest of criminal proceedings would against the Marines would happen in Italy. Regarding this second ruling, which of PCA, that Marines would get functional immunity, it is a very important ruling because this was the gray area before. It was gray area because what are the legality of naval officers being posted on commercial tankers as VPD, Vessel Protection Detachment duties. So now this gray area seems to settle down, stating that these naval officers or all these Marines have functional immunity, and they can now perform their task better. And I think this particular ruling would also help to curb piracy in the Arabian Sea in future. Uh, in India's favor, there were two part of the ruling. One was that uh, Italian action. PCA laid down that Italian action breached India's freedom of navigation under Article 87, subclause 87, clause 1, subclause A of UNCLOS. This particular aspect of freedom of navigation we would be dealing tomorrow in the second part of the webinar. Second important ruling is India has right to receive compensation from Italy with respect to the violation of right to life, the physical harm caused, the material damage to property, and the moral harm suffered by the captain and the crew of St. Anthony. So India has right to claim compensation. How that compensation would be decided would be amicably settled between India and Italy going forward. That is the ruling. Up now, the problem with this kind of ruling is, which I was initially saying, that India's right would get trampled in future if such event occurs again. India or any other country. I mean, if such kind of rulings would come, it would become very easier for future. Such naval officers or anyone would go scot free. You will come into the contiguous zone, you will kill the citizens, and you would go scot free because you will have something called functional immunity. This particular ruling, but yes, someone can argue, but Italy is still trying that criminal case. Yes, the argument is partly good and partly justified as well. So I'm just giving you both sides of the coin. And now we are coming straight to the second part of the webinar, that is peaceful settlement of dispute under UNCLOS. What are the peaceful settlement of disputes under UNCLOS? So under UNCLOS, there are two kinds of peaceful settlement of disputes. One is voluntary settlement and second is compulsory procedure. Okay. With respect to voluntary procedures are triggered according to stop signing. Yes, I got your autograph. Thank you so much. Uh, Voluntary procedures are laid down under Article 279. I would want you all to read it once again. The state party shall settle any dispute between them concerning the interpretation and application of the convention. Actually, when there is a dispute regarding interpretation, it actually threatens the integrity of the convention itself. So such provisions within convention actually takes care of long lasting implementation and existence of a particular convention. So how Article 279 is important are manifold. There are various ways of looking at it. So actually these are all international legal maturity which you would be gaining once you will be reading international law in more detail in years to come, maybe because by the way, my way of presenting is more concentrated on the students of graduation who may not be very much well versed with the doctrines of international law. So I'm going that basic only and only for them. There must be some experts who would know more than me I'm sorry, and I'm really thankful for your patience there. Anyway, so it laws was established on the and it was modeled under ICJ. It laws were established according to the provisions of United Nations Convention of the Law of Sea. It laws is International Tribunal for the Law of Sea, and it is modeled somewhat on International Court of Justice ka procedure, and it is a permanent international tribunal. So these are two objective points regarding it laws. Uh, Moving further, so the overall purpose of this second part of the presentation will be to give you a brief outline of the procedures of international dispute settlement in the Law of Sea Convention. So basic structure of dispute settlement mechanism under Law of the Sea is, it is governed by part 15, which you can see here, part 15 of UNCLOS 1982, which is divided into three sections. Section 1, if you can see here, general provisions. It is Section 1 deals with voluntary dispute settlement procedures. If that fails, then Section 2 gets implemented, that is compulsory procedure. If you are not able to settle the disputes according to Section 1 of part 15, then Section 2 immediately gets applicable, and that is the compulsory dispute settlement procedure under UNCLOS 3. But Section 2 has to be read subject to Section 3, which lays down the limitation and optional exceptions to the compulsory procedures. So limitations to the compulsory procedures are laid down under Section 3. So not outrightly. Actually, you know what? Why international frameworks are made in such ways where there is an aspect of where there's an aspect of compulsion, but then it is subject to certain limitations. There is an exception as well. These exceptions are actually inculcated during the debates which were occurring while adopting this particular convention, to take care of the interests of other states as well. Some states would not like compulsory settlements. They would say that these compulsory settlements would ultimately infringe our sovereignty. Well, in that case, you can't have a convention without them being party to your convention. So for to instigate them or to provoke them to be party to the convention, there were certain limitations which were laid down, and those limitations were laid down in Section 3 of part 15 of the convention. Dispute settlement mechanism can be seen not only in part 3, but there are other provisions as well which are beyond the scope of this particular Enric Alexi case, but still I would pitch up those for your own knowledge. That is part 11 section 5, which deals with dispute settlement and advisory opinions by seabed chamber of ITLOS. There's a seabed chamber which takes care of seabed related issues. It is quite territorial in nature. A very important aspect of, I'll just that's not relevant here, but I will just tell you for your own knowledge, why this seabed chamber is a good innovation by UNCLOS is because, first of all, it can give advisory opinions like ICJ. Even ITLOS can give advisory opinion under ICJ, but then there is a caveat that advisory opinion can only be given with respect to subject matter of UNCLOS only, not any other international legal provisions. Okay, so advisory opinions kya hota hai ki you ask these authorities ki you clarify this particular legal aspect which may be related to some or the other case. Okay, so those are advisory opinion. They are not binding in nature between the state parties, but they essentially create a jurisprudence, international legal jurisprudence on that particular aspect. So that way it becomes a bit more important. These advisory opinion regarding the seabed chamber has a territorial jurisdiction. It has a jurisdiction with respect to the seabed activities, both commercial as well otherwise. One important innovation of of UNCLOS with respect to seabed chamber is that even private organization can be party to it. So that's a progressive development. Okay. So part 11 section 5 deals with seabed chamber. Annexure 5 deals with conciliation. Annexure 6 deals with all the provisions of ITLOS. Annexure 6 is nothing but ITLOS statute. How you have ICJ statute, similarly it law statute is given under Annexure 6, whereby there are a lot of provision. Who will be the judge of it? What will be the quora? How many number of members? What will be their qualifications, etc., etc. How it laws is going to take cognizance of particular case? What will be the jurisdiction? What would be the binding nature of the judgment, etc. These are those areas which Annexure 6 deals with. Annexure 7 deals with arbitration, and this is relevant for us because ultimately the ruling has come under Annexure 7 arbitration. It is technically called Annexure 7 arbitration. This ruling has come under the Permanent Court of Arbitration situated in in Hague. And there is another important annexure, that is Annexure 8, which deals with special arbitration. When I talk about special arbitration, maybe I'll talk about it a bit later, because it is important to understand the difference between arbitration and special arbitration. Anyway, that I will be dealing with later. So now, Article 279 we have already dealt with, that deals with peacefully settling the dispute with respect to interpretation and application of the convention. You'll have to take care of Article 2, paragraph 3 of United Nations Charter, and Article 33, that is good faith element. So therefore, Article 279 entails or would help the international community to establish international peace and security aspect of it, and also settling the dispute in good faith. Another important provision is Article 280, which deals with free choice while settling the dispute. So nation states, the state parties have free choice with respect to the choice of procedure they want to inculcate for their dispute settlement. So number one, so that free choice has to be conferred according to Article 33, that is good faith. And this particular actually, the notion of free choice is not only there in Article 280. This notion of free choice can be seen in Article 33 of UN Charter. The notion of free choice can also be seen in second principle of 1970 Friendly Relations Declaration. Okay, so this is that important phenomena. Nothing in this part impairs the right of any state to agree to at any time to settle a dispute between them concerning the interpretation and application of this convention by any peaceful means of their own choice. So it gives you some kind of forum shopping. Okay. Anyway, so peaceful means chosen by parties to the disputes, usually. That there's another if we would go a bit further, if we would grow our understanding a bit further, all this argument is added by this particular line, that peaceful means chosen by the parties, these voluntary methods chosen by the parties, they actually prevail over Part 15 of the Law of the Sea Convention. Law of the Sea Convention, what it does is, Part 15, what it does is, it gives you an option to choose. And those options are beyond the convention also. You can choose your own methodology. You can use conciliation, mediation, anything which you want to. So these things, original intent of the convention is that these particular voluntary methods should prevail over the rest of Part 15 of the UNCLOS. And if the dispute is not settled by non-compulsory methods, then the provision of compulsory procedure laid down in Section 2 of Part 15 shall apply. For that, we can have a reading of Article 286 of the convention, and Article 286 talks about, see, you can see the line. Section 2 deals with compulsory procedures entailing binding decisions. Okay. Article 286, application of procedure under this section. Subject to Section 3, that is the limitation aspect which I was talking about. Section 3 of Part 15. Subject to Section 3, any dispute concerning the interpretation or application of this convention shall, where no settlement has been reached by recourse to Section 1, that is, where no settlement occurred according to voluntary methods, it would be submitted at the request of any party to the dispute to the court or tribunal having jurisdiction under this section. Okay, and this section has to be read with Annexure 7, 8, etc. as well. So this is the compulsory procedure mechanism. I would like to pitch in another important principle out here. I want you to read Article 282 with Article 36(2) of ICJ statute. So that would give you a bit of understanding regarding the concept of optional clause. So between two states which have accepted the optional clause of ICJ, when you accept the optional clause of ICJ, you actually allow ICJ's jurisdiction upon you. That is according to Article 36(2). So between two states which have accepted the optional clause of ICJ, the jurisdiction of ICJ shall prevail over procedures of Part 15 of the Law of the Sea Convention. So that is one important aspect which you should know. And now I would deal entirely on, I'm almost at the end of my presentation here. And now I would briefly touch upon compulsory dispute settlement mechanism, how it happens, etc., etc. So Article 287, it says that it actually, Article 287 is technically called Montreux formula, Montreux formula. Okay, and it holds the formula for flexibly choosing one or more of the four different forums for compulsory procedure. If you are not able to settle your dispute voluntarily, then you can choose one out of these four mechanisms, and one out of these four mechanisms are these four mechanisms are: number one is ITLAS, which is established by the convention and it is a permanent body to settle the dispute. Number two is International Court of Justice. Number three is arbitral tribunal constituted under annexure in accordance with Annexure 7. And last is special arbitral tribunal. Over here, I would just distinguish between ICJ and ITLAS are technically not relevant to Enrica Lexi, but then going into ITLAS is altogether different lecture. We where you can yourself read. These are objective provisions, which is very well understood by anyone who's making a plain reading of Annexure 6, that is statute of ITLAS. But then over here, one thing is important, that is the difference between Annexure 7 arbitration and Annexure 8 special arbitration. Annexure 7 arbitration may arbitral tribunal consist of 5 members, and they are expert in the field of maritime affairs. They are expert in the field of maritime affairs. In Annexure 8, which is called special arbitration, special form of arbitral tribunal, which also is composed of 5 members, but they are experts in the field of, number one, fisheries; number two, protection and preservation of marine environment; number three, with respect to marine scientific research; and number four, they are experts of navigation. That means they are expert of pollution from vehicles and by and by dumping of hazardous waste, etc. So these are the 4 areas only which Annexure 8 arbitration deal with. That is why it is called special arbitration. And also it is called special because there's a very important jurisprudence of Annexure 8 arbitration, is that of binding inquiry. There's an inquiry panel, and the inquiry of facts done by that panel are binding upon state parties. So that is important. So findings of inquiry is conclusive between members in Annexure 8. So dispute आधा वहीं settle हो जाता है. So that is why Annexure 8 dispute settlement mechanism is called special arbitration. Anyway, this particular choice of procedure, that once voluntary procedure fails, you have a forum shopping of four different forums under Article 287, that is ITLAS, ICJ, Annexure 7, Annexure 8. But beyond this and above this, there is provision under Article 292 that even if no declaration is made under Article 287, no declaration under Article 287 का मतलब कि ये you have not give the state parties have not declared which forum they want to go, then also ITLAS का compulsory jurisdiction would prevail on following 2 requests. One is prompt release of vessels and crew according to Article 292, and number 2 is request for provisional measures under Article 295. These both are very relevant to Enrica Lexi also. 295, that which I read shortly when I was discussing the facts, where I said that on 26 July 2015, Italy approached ITLAS, and ITLAS came up with a ruling that Italy and India should suspend all criminal proceedings against Marines. That was provisional measure under Article 295, Clause 5 of UNCLOS. So you can read it for yourself. We would not discuss. There's not much jurisprudence on that, and it is beyond the scope also. And second is prompt release of vessels and crew. Actually क्या होता है कि prompt release of vessels and crew का चक्कर ये है कि when such vessels like this oil tanker was detained by Indian authorities and these marines were detained by Indian authorities, ऐसे में होता ये है कि the nation state whose the flag state whose citizens citizens you have actually detained, or the property of that particular state you have what confiscated, etc., like in this case Enrica Lexi oil tanker. In such situations, the flag state can approach ITLOS, and it is irrelevant that you have not chosen any procedure in Article 287, yet you can approach ITLOS and stating that kindly prompt release my people and my vessel. Okay, so in that case, ITLOS would give that ruling, but this has to be balanced also. So prompt release के बारे में, there is a very important case called Monte Conforco case, MONTECONFURCO case. It was the case between Seychelles and France, and it is called prompt release case. In this case, the ruling came. I'm quoting and unquoting the part of the ruling that. The notion of prompt release under Article 292 reconciles the interest of the flag state with the interest of detaining state to secure appearance in its court of the master and the payment of penalties. मतलब एक तरफ we take care of the interest of the flag state, but we balance this with the interest of the detaining state. This particular interest is balanced with the interest of detaining state, that you can try those killers, in this case marines, in your own court, and you can also ask for penalty. So iska option ye prompt release ka the funda hai under Article 292, that the flag state will have to give a financial security, and as soon as you give that financial security, you will have to prompt release. Like India will have to prompt release Enrica Lexi tanker, but we did not prompt release Italian Marines. That is a different story altogether. Anyway, one more important jurisprudence which I would want to flag up. Just 1 minute. There are certain messages which I would like to read here. Okay, these are appreciations. Thank you so much. Wait. All right. I thought there are certain questions. If you still have some questions, you can direct message to the spill, and they would text me, and if it is relevant, I'll pick up here, or I'll pick up tomorrow after the second part of the webinar. There's one important jurisprudence which I really want you to know. I mean, that's again not relevant to this particular case, but I think you should know. While I was preparing for this webinar, I came across this aspect. There is no compulsory dispute settlement mechanism for EEZ disputes, that is the disputes under exclusive economic zone, with regard to the exercise of discretionary powers by the coastal state over fishing and marine scientific research. Compulsory conciliation is, however, allowed under Annexure 5, Section 2. Compulsory conciliation, mind it. But then conciliation is itself a kind of a voluntary mechanism. So compulsory is just just a chocolate or a toffee to the state party. Take it, get satisfied, enjoy. But those are really not proper dispute settlement mechanism. But why this provision? That is important to understand. Like for example, compulsory dispute settlement mechanism cannot be invoked in cases where coastal state ka discretion has been used with respect to fishing and marine scientific research in exclusive economic zone, that is beyond contiguous zone, beyond 24 nautical miles and up till 200 nautical miles. वहां पे क्या होता है, these coastal states, जैसे कुछ coastal states हैं, their economy is dominant on fishing. तो उनके rights को satisfy किया है UNCLOS ने in this particular with this particular jurisprudence, that okay, with respect to these coastal states having discretionary powers with respect to fishing, कि वो fishing का right किन countries को देंगे या किन private organizations को देंगे, those particular rights would be preserved and you would not be compelled for compulsory procedures of UNCLOS. So they have been satisfied with these provisions. Another important provision which I would like to flag up is with respect to Article 297, the debate of Article 297 and Article 121(3) of UNCLOS. Article 121(3) is nothing, which says, it says that when a particular island is not habitable, it doesn't have I only answered, actually I asked you to Google. Anyway, when a particular island is not habitable, that particular island will not have these three zones: contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, etc. So what happens in such cases when it is compared with Article 287, that whether Article 121(3) or Article 297 shall be determined by the court or the tribunal or not. This particular answer was given by fisheries jurisdiction case between Spain and Canada. ठीक है, फिशरीज इन दिस पर्टिकुलर केस हाई सीज फिशरीज, इसमें जो ले डाउन किया था वो ये था कि हाई सीज फिशरी फॉल विद इन द स्कोप ऑफ कंपल्सरी प्रोसीजर्स. व्हाट इफ द इशू, अब यहाँ पे जो आर्ग्यूमेंट है वो ये है कि there is a jurisprudence that high seas fisheries shall fall within the scope of compulsory procedures. Right now we talked about EEZ, but what about high seas? High seas ka fisheries se related disputes fall under compulsory mechanisms. But there was a contention in this particular case, Spain versus Canada, that is fisheries jurisdiction case, that what if the issue is with respect to fish stock straddling between EEZ and high seas. हाई सीज क्या है? एनीथिंग बियॉन्ड 200 नॉटिकल माइल्स. सो व्हाट इफ, अब फिश को तो नहीं पता ना कि अब EEZ I would turn back and go back to Canada. No, she doesn't know, it doesn't know. So they keep on straddling around between high seas and exclusive economic zone. So this is a legal gray area, and this was just quoted as legal gray area in fisheries jurisdiction case, and it is still not settled. I think I'm done, but I want to read Article 292 especially with you. 292, that's the last thing we will be talking about today. Prompt release of vessels and crews. Where the authorities of a state parties have detained a vessel flying the flag of another state party, and it is alleged that the detaining state has not complied with the provision of the convention for the prompt release of the vessel and its crew upon the posting of reasonable bond or financial security. I said you'll have to give financial security, then you can go to ITLOS, and claiming that your crew and vessel is not promptly released by the detaining state, then you go to the ITLOS, and this particular provision applies. It says the question of release from detention may be submitted to any court or tribunal agreed upon by the party, or failing such agreement within 10 days from the time of detention, to a court or tribunal accepted by the detaining state under Article 287 or International Tribunal of the Law of Sea. So it prevails over compulsory procedure. That's what I wanted you to know. So I have made the ground actually to discuss the second part of this webinar, that is the legality of Enrica Lexie case. Now you know what is voluntary procedure. Now you know what is compulsory procedure. Now you know the facts of the case. Now we would try in the second part of the webinar. Again, my webinar, the second part of the webinar would be divided into two parts. In the first 20-30 odd minutes, I would deal with what was India's argument for invoking its own jurisdiction on Italian marines. India was partly right as well, but unluckily, or what we say, unfortunately, the ruling came against us. And the second part of the second webinar, I would deal with the sovereign immunity aspects of Italian marine. As well as I would also deal in how India's domestic law were applied in this particular case. That's it from me. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for bearing with me and for patience and for listening to me patiently and with some autographs and signatures. Thank you so much. Thank you, Spill, for giving me this chance, and I would like to take the second webinar with. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. On behalf of Spill Mumbai, we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Sudhir Verma for taking time out for us today evening and for an extremely enlightening talk. As you can see, many people, sir, have found this talk very enlightening and knowledgeable by their comments in the chat. A big thank you to all the participants who joined us today evening. Do join us tomorrow for the second part of this web series, where your questions will also be answered. We hope to see you again for Spill's event in the future. Please follow Spill Mumbai on all our social media platforms to get any updates on our future events. Thank you all once again.
Wait, don't shut down. Let me read it. I'm feeling so good.
No,
Thank you
no
so
worries,
much,
sir.
Arvind, Anjali, Irfan. Thank you so much, Dharmendra, Mayank, Satish. I would like to personally thank you guys. And if you really want have any interest in international law or something, you can reach up to me on sudhir.research@gmail.com. Thank you so much. There's Sir, Article 292 says that the case must be filed within 10 days, but Italy took almost 3 years to file and it lost. It lost me. They didn't file for prompt release, which we talked on 26th July. Wala, it was regarding provisional measures. Uh, for prompt release, they filed another petition, which was immediately after the incident. Uh, okay. Thank you so much, all of you, for appreciating, and this gives me added zeal to be better in the next webinar. Thank you so much, Spill. Thank you, Yash, and thank you, Alessandra. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Good night. Participants can kindly leave the call now.